And today we're taking a look at another Gait video. This is Haider, and Haider was a student on my most recent flow motion model course in Toronto in November. He gave us permission to look at his Gait video. We filmed it but did not use it for the course. I don't remember a single thing about Haider's Gait, so this will be as if I'm looking at it through fresh eyes today. So bear with me if I'm stumbling and fumbling and second guessing things. That's just kind of the natural process I go through when I look at a Gait video. So here we go, uncensored, unmodified, me just trying to use my brain on a Monday afternoon. So let's do what we normally do with these videos and watch full. Hands out, just whatever your eye is drawn to. Let's watch that again. So me, I am drawn to his right side of his pelvis. This is the right side. This area here. So I'll just watch that. There seems to be quite a bit of a hiking motion, and as if he's, to put in very untechnical terms, like carrying his right leg through. So I'm curious about this right hip and what its movement potential is. One more time, let's go at full speed. There's also a sense in his pelvis that he is only rotating it to the right. So the right side of his ASIS stays forward in space of his left one. It looks like almost all throughout. And that ability to only right rotate a pelvis would make it easier for his right leg to step forward. So I'm curious if that will stand out in some of his phases. His head, if you look at the level of his ears, there's a sense his right ear sits higher than his left ear all throughout as well. If you look at this side, his right ear, or I could be wrong about that. We'll have to slow that down and confirm. Something about his head. And last thing, there is an interesting sense of his both femurs not being able to externally rotate, just a bit of a pigeon-toed type vibe. So questions about his pelvis dominate for me. All right. Make any other notes that you'd like to. I'm just assuming that other people are as interested in doing this as me for a learning opportunity. All right, so why don't we break it down phase by phase, and we'll do this as if we're looking through the flow motion model. Gary Ward's lens of observing gait mechanics. So just for a nice easy place to start, let's put him in a left transition phase. Left, right, left transition is a mid stance where we'd like to see everything in neutral as a general rule. You can see the level of his shoulders is not level. The right side appears a little higher. And there's a sense that his right side of his pelvis, it's hard to tell without actually seeing bony landmarks, but my suspicion is the right side of his pelvis is higher. And with his right shoulder higher, we have a rib cage that might be tipped to the left, or a thoracic spine that has a lateral flexion to the right. And I see a right ear that looks a bit higher as well. So I want to call that a right lateral, or a right hike of the skull, left lateral flexion of the neck. So could he be in a stance where everything is laterally flexing to the left? To be confirmed. His knee on his transition leg looks flexed. We'd ideally like it to be extending. It doesn't need to be completely extended here because in transition, he is just beginning to extend his knee, not fully extended as he would be with his leg behind him. However, that does look suspicious to me. Like I'd want to know more about his knee's abilities to extend on that side. Difficult to say much without comparing to the other side or seeing more phases. So let's move on. And let's just roll right into his next phase, which would be his right heel strike. Right about there. Late swing, early heel strike. Now, if we look at the level of his pelvis in that journey, it does have the appearance of his left side of his pelvis hiking up as he swings his right leg forwards. Ideally, there should be no hiking in the pelvis, just a pure shift. The hiking in the pelvis on the left, this shape, would give us, whoopsie, that would give us a adduction of his left hip. The hike contributing to the closure of this joint space here between his able to adduct either. What's the quality of his heel contact? So that's where his heel actually hits the ground. You can see it's a little bit medial, that heel contact, not posterior and lateral on the calcaneus like we'd like it to be. This knee is actually getting to a decent extension. And this foot should be supinated. And to be completely honest, I've seen much more shitty supination on back feet. So there's a part of me that's like, ah, that's kind of nice to see that. The spine appears to have, in the thoracic, still a bit of a left lateral flexion, so that's been consistent throughout these two phases. But most interestingly, the difficulty shifting the pelvis right and the minimal adductions and abductions. Can he adduct right? Can he abduct left? Okay, let's move on to next phase from here. We'll have a right suspension. And we'll look at the spot where his toes on his right foot seem to make full contact on the ground. So I'm going to start about there. Does that look like a foot that has pronated? Or is pronating? Should be full pronation when all the toes are down. And there's a sense of him slightly everting the calcaneus, slightly making a journey from lateral-ish to medial-ish in his foot pressures, but not very much. He's better than me. Last time I looked at my feet pronating. So I'll give him a needs pronation memo. In the full speed, we noticed right side of the pelvis tended to hike a lot. So this is where we should see that pelvis hike happening. Does it happen starting to? A little bit happens right there, but considering how standout it was in his full speed walking, I'm a little bit suspicious about the quality of his pelvis hike on the right, which again is a indication of his ability to adduct his right hip. without saying too much more, let's let him get into the next phase, which will be his transition on the right. So look at him when his feet are pretty much next to each other. And we're looking for a level, neutral body. Oops. So his foot should be making a journey into a supination. And I personally don't see much change in pronation and supination, but what does start to happen here, if you look at his heel on the ground, do you see right about here, his heel begins to lift off. And me personally, that looks like a little bit much of a heel lift to be happening in this moment in time, where his foot should just be resupinating back to neutral. The heel lift should come later in his full supination. And the heel lift is just telling us maybe a bit of an early plantar flexion of the talocrural joint. It's maybe a bit too much plantar flexion, and it makes me wonder about the quality of his talocrural joint dorsiflexion on the right. Does he have it? Is it missing? If we go back to his left transition, there isn't the same sense of that early heel lift. Oh, it is interesting though, is do you see how we didn't look at his left suspension yet? We'll get to that, but it looks like, do you see how as he's entering his transition phase, the Achilles, it actually bows inward. So his foot pronates more while his foot is supposed to be supinating. So on the left, we have no supination happening in transition. But on the right, we have a bit of an early plantar flexion of the talocrural joint, as if the ankle is the only joint he can attempt to do his supination from. Interesting. So if I were to look at him a bit more in depth, I'd want to know the quality of his talocrural joint dorsiflexion on the right and the quality of his supination in the rear foot on the left, which would put him into a can he step forwards with the right leg and backwards the left leg. So where were we? Right transition, a little bit of an early spring out of that foot with that plantar flexion of the ankle. So if my suspicion is that he struggles to adduct on the right, let's see what the quality is of him getting his center of mass left. Can he do it? Here we go. So this should be where his pelvis is shifting left. And ooh, that is where that right pelvis hike happens in a big way. That was happening on his left side when he was going into a right heel strike. Wow, that's pretty hardcore. So definitely a big hike on the right, which means no hip abduction. And I want to say, if you compare that to the left side in that same moment, so here's his right heel strike, his pelvis hikes on the left, but it's not as severe as that. Whoa, whoa. So I would want to know more about where his body rests in static space. Is he already, let's say, just as a hypothetical, let's say he's already resting like this, just for example. We'll just put his head centered just for fun. So is he already shifted right with his pelvis, hiked right with his pelvis, and adducted right? And that's where he lives. And therefore, the journey to get to the right was not good. Whoops. I was going to draw a sad face. Not good getting his pelvis to the right. But his journey to the left is even sadder because he's stuck with that adducted right hip and cannot shift out of it. It would make me wonder about any potential injuries, maybe that left foot that can't supinate well. Is there an old history there? Let's see what else it looks like on his left leg. So he's not shifting his pelvis, he's just kind of plantar flexing out of that ankle, keeping this hip adducted. So that's a deducted. Now, I'm not sure if this is true, we'll have to check, but it looks like a whole lot of swing into extension with that left arm. Could that be his way of getting his mass left? What was it like with his right leg coming forward? Okay. What's the rotation of his spine like? So here we should have pelvis left, spine right, and this arm extending, and this arm flexing. And then here we should have rotation left of the rib cage, rotation right. Ooh, does that look like a rotation right of the pelvis? Not a good one. You can see his rotation to the left here is quite ample compared to the rotation to the right. So that is, I kind of forget what I said in the beginning of this video. But at this moment in time, I'm thinking that rotation left of the pelvis looks a bit nicer. Oh, now this is me in real time struggling to remember my lefts and rights. That looks a bit more like a left rotation of the pelvis. And that right rotation, I don't know if I like it. Left rotation of the pelvis. Right rotation. Yeah, I don't think there's much right rotation of the pelvis. So the left leg forward step is a bit compromised. So right rotation of the pelvis, not as good. I keep trying to draw a smiley face, sad face, and it keeps zooming me in and out. So what I was, before I got stuck on the pelvis thing, I was looking at the quality of his spine rotations. So here's his spine rotation right and left. To me, it looks like he has a little bit more ability to rotate his spine left than right. His arm swings might be similar, and I might just be making things up. So let's not get too stuck on that. Monica, talking to myself. And we left off here at the heel strike. Okay, speaking of not getting stuck into stuff, looking at the knee valgus left versus right. Comparing the angles. To me, that left knee looks like it is a bit more valgus, a bit more of a externally rotated, flexed type position. However, he looks like this knee in his heel strike stays a bit more flexed. On the right, on the left, there's a sense of him kicking his knee and locking it out before it lands. We're building a very strong picture here of preferring to step forwards with the right leg. Or sorry, we're not building a strong picture of that. We're building a very mixed up picture of missing pronation and supination on both sides. The reason I said that was because I was thinking, well, his pelvis, which is easier rotating to the left, would make it easier for him to put his right leg forward. But he's missing that dorsiflexion in the talocrural joint, which he'd need to step forward onto his front leg. He's got more flexion in this knee, which makes it easier to step forward into that knee in a suspension phase. He's got more hike on this side, which makes it easier to adduct his hip. So most things point towards easier stepping onto the right. On the left, however, that knee looks a little funky, like it's already in a compromised femur internally rotated, knee externally rotated, but extended, hyperextended perhaps, hyperextension of that knee. And could that be something that makes it not super happy to adduct his left hip and shift to the left? So let's finally get to where he's fully weight-bearing in his left foot. And that is quite a bit of an internal rotation of that whole leg, really. The femur, tibia, even the foot. So are there any joints in his left leg, or is the hip just swiveling inwards? And could he be doing that as a way of preventing excessive motion in his knee? One way of blocking a pronation of the foot or a flexion of the knee or an external rotation of the knee, if it's unhappy, which you'd need to step onto your left leg, is to just turn the foot in. Pointing the foot inwards will block you from pronating. So I'd be really curious to see a side-by-side or just a static alignment or a representation of his talus subtalar joint axis. And is the left leg the one that has a bit more of a E version in his foot shape? And therefore, maybe that is pushing his mass to the right and giving him this sort of left hip abduction, right hip adduction shape. Okay, so here we go. He is in his suspension phase. Toes are down. Wasn't a whole lot of movement into pronation there. His foot stayed pretty static. He's still got a much larger valgus angle in this knee. This is where we see that spine lateral flexion to the left quite prominently, but his pelvis is quite level. So again, we're seeing missing adduction and hike. Adduction of his left hip and left hike of his pelvis are missing. So some left suspension phase. Ability to get his mass left is not happening. And then this takes us back to the beginning in his transition phase. On this side, he does that same little lift up with the heel a little bit too early, but it's not as big. So it looks to me as if his body is doing things to quiet down the amount of pronation in this foot. And I wonder if it's because of this compromised shape of his knee. Is he holding this leg internally rotated and trying to prevent any movement in his foot in pronation so that his left knee doesn't get pulled more into that valgus shape? So I'd be really curious about, is there a knee history on his left? Hopefully we'll get the answers. And remember when I said I was kind of happy with this earlier? Like, oh, his knee's extended when it's behind him, and wow, his foot is staying on the ground. He's got 2 points of contact in that back foot. I am now not so sure if that is the thing I to celebrate. Because look at the different quality on this side. He has way less internal rotation of the entire leg. It looks a bit more appropriate on the right. So I'm really curious about what may have happened. Left leg. All right, we'll stop there. There's definitely more to get sucked into. Some head stuff perhaps, but that'll be a story for another day. And for now, I'll leave it there, and I'll leave the question on the table. What makes it difficult for him to get into his left leg suspension phase, getting his mass left, and really committing to his left foot when he walks? Alrighty, until next time. Hope you enjoyed this little gait nerd out, and if you have any questions or thoughts, just shoot them my way. Have a great day, folks.